Hello everyone and welcome to Climate Australia channel. My name is Lee Constable, I'm your host, and I'd like to start by acknowledging where I am physically, although I might be broadcasting to you anywhere in the world. I am here on Turrbal land. I'd like to pay my respect to elders here, past and present, and of course to anyone here in Turrbal country on the Condamika coast who have an ongoing relationship with land, sea and sky. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're actually broadcasting to you all in a really important week, which is NAIDOC week here in Australia. And in doing so, in acknowledging where I am, I want to acknowledge any First Nations people, whether you're in Australia or somewhere else in the world, who might be joining us today. Today, we are talking about storytelling. We're talking about community engagement. Those, of course, have been traditions in Australia for tens of thousands of years. I've got a more recent Australian storyteller here today. I'm joined by Mark Spencer, who is the founder of Climactic Collective. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be here. Very much more recent. So
yes, yeah. So you sound like you're not actually from Australia. You're from the North America. Where are you? Where's home to you, or where are you from?
Good question. Where is home? Home is really wherever I happen to be at the moment. I try to make that whole global citizen thing as true as possible, although it's always, you've got roots. Roots are good, and my roots are from just outside of Seattle in the States, where my dad is from, and then my mom is from New Zealand, and I'm a dual citizen, American Kiwi, and I actually grew up in New Zealand since I was 12, but I was in America long enough for this accent to be what comes out when I speak.
There you go, an Amerikiwi. That's awesome. And right now, you've been living in Australia for a while, or on and off?
Yeah, solidly since when was it exactly? It was very late 2016. So yeah, coming up on next year will be my 5th year in Australia. So wow, already half a decade very quickly. Feeling old, Lee. Feeling old.
Well, I think it's just a good amount of time to kind of get a sense of the wild weirdness that is Australia and climate change. Just hello, Australia in the house, says Doug Parsons. We've got Ken saying yo, 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 Sarah saying woohoo. Ken says Seattle and New Zealand is a good combo. I'm just reading the chat at the moment in CimpaticoTV, where we're streaming to, in the home of Climate Australia, but you might actually be watching on the Climactic Facebook page, my Facebook page, on YouTube, mine, or the Simpatico YouTube. So say hello wherever you are, and those comments will get to me. So that's quite a journey geographically, but when we look at your relationship with climate communications and climate podcasting, where did that come from?
Yeah, it was a product of my dislocation and that kind of constantly moving around. So for me, I was going back and forth between countries as a kid, spending 6 months of the year in each country, 2 summers a year, which is, hey, great. And maybe I'm better adapted to warm weather than some because of that. But actually, I hate it. I hate the heat. I would love 20 degrees and slightly overcast. A Seattle summer's day is just right for me. But because I was constantly going, I didn't really develop those roots in any one place. So when I found podcasting in the early 2000s, it was about 2002, 2003. It was very, very early days. Like the iPod had just come out. This whole idea of getting audio content you could take with you that wasn't, you didn't have to tune into a certain radio station, or you didn't have to get books on tape. It's the idea of completely digital audio. I was all about that, and I was always the kid with headphones on, just constantly. So I started young to listening to podcasts, and I've done probably on average 5 hours a day of podcast listening, pretty much since I was 13. It's been a little less this year as I've been on my computer more. I don't have a commute because of lockdown and COVID and everything, but podcasting definitely started there. And then climate started upon arriving in Melbourne a few years ago, which I'm sure we can get into if you want.
Yeah, let's get into that now. So when you arrived in Melbourne, you were already interested in podcasting and in digital entertainment. How did climate come into the mix here in Australia?
So I was super excited to move to Melbourne because it's like a city where some of the shows I listened to got made, and I was finally like going to the source. So like, despite that, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can tune in and get it. I wanted to feel close to this stuff. So when I arrived, I started talking to podcasters, and being me, I was talking to a lot of people, just constantly yabbering on. And one of the things I found after I started working at a technology company was like point of sales stuff for hospitality. I was like selling software to high-end restaurants and hospitality groups. I got talking at a conference to a woman who practiced sustainability, improving sustainability practices for the hospitality sector. And she started telling me about food waste. And it was something I always knew kind of at the back of my mind. I'd worked plenty of hospo gigs before, waiting tables, working in kitchens. I knew we threw out a lot of food, and I knew that was wasteful and that was wrong. And like the kid in me that grew up in a semi-rural area was like, I knew people with pigs. Why are we throwing this out? But she exposed me to methane coming out of food waste, and the fact that hospitality sector, which is such a huge part of this Melbourne culture and more broadly Australian culture, the fact that it wasn't just an innocuous, harmless thing taking part in this industry, going along for Sunday brunch. You're actually, if you don't empty your plate, you're responsible for more emissions than like the transport sector. And that's just shocking. We'll ban trucks from London, but we won't tell our friend off for not finishing their smashed avocado. Even though that the cause and effect isn't linked there.
Yeah, or we won't think really carefully about how much food we can eat versus how much we're ordering or taking leftovers with us.
That's right. And restaurants are resistant to letting you order half portions. And like there's a lot of ways we can tackle the problem that there's a reluctance on any one party to be the first to move and to have that sense of, oh, I'm giving something up, or I'm losing something I had as a kid or my parents had, or, there's lots of aspects to all of that. But it was on that realization that I wasn't just a bystander to climate change. Like I wasn't just just watching it sail by, but I was actually part of an industry that was causing anthropogenic heating, and I was starting to get really concerned about the climate crisis. For me, it wasn't a light bulb moment worrying about climate. It was a slow realization from actually living in China for a couple of years as an English teacher, seeing what it was like in an environment that had been degraded, and just sort of progress was ranked above the environment for decades there. And there's a huge reason for it. Millions lifted out of poverty, but you can only drive past so many rivers that are completely stagnant, and you see dead fish floating in them, and only go so many months on end of gray skies and never seeing blue sky, and seeing kids wearing masks. I was used to it this year because I'd already seen it.
Yeah.
And so I arrived in Melbourne. I thought, hey, this is lovely. Skies are blue, air is sweet. No issues here. And it was realizing that no, Australia is the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the form of coal. We are just as big a petro state as Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And that's not how we like to see ourselves. So it was very confronting.
And also we're also complicit in the emissions of China when you think about how much the economies are linked, and the fossil fuel market and things like that are linked between Australia and China. So this obviously waste is something really tangible and everyday that can be a big wake-up call for someone. Why do you think that something like podcasting is a solution? Like, what was it, just that it was what you knew and you thought you'd start there, or do you think podcasting has something unique to offer?
So I arrived in Melbourne thinking, well, I'd like to maybe start a podcast. I'd like to do a podcast about pop culture. I quite like Star Wars. There's lots of guys that look like me already doing shows like this. It's established. It's a normal thing. People might think, ugh, another one, rather than that's weird. But when I arrived and instead found that, oh, this climate thing's an issue, where are the podcasts that I can listen to learn more about the Australian context for this? Where I was looking for ways to get engaged, and I was going along to the websites of not to name names, but the big environmental nonprofit groups, and even smaller local neighborhood climate action groups and like street cleanup groups. And I'd go to their website and there'd be two buttons. There'd be donate and volunteer. And I wanted to learn anything about these groups, who the people were, whether I'd be a good fit. I haven't had a very conventional background before arriving in Melbourne. I didn't know if I'd like, I wasn't a hippie. I wasn't like super like waste aware. I was just, I thought a normal average Joe. And I was a bit scared of going along to one of these groups without knowing what the dynamic was like. And in these groups, you had to go along to get a sense of that. They didn't kind of put themselves out there on their website. There wasn't like a YouTube channel, and there definitely wasn't a podcast. And I'm like, why not? You guys have regular meetings. You talk about things. Why isn't this available? And I want to hear it. So I found an open space in podcasting. And now in 2020, there's over 1 million podcasts. And I'm like, you only find a gap like this if it's either such a bad idea that someone's tried it and failed, or thought about it and thought that's dumb, or no one's done it yet, but it should happen. And I'm like, well, give it a try.
And I think there's a clear mutual benefit, it seems there. Like one of the problems you found was, even as someone who was engaged and wanting to know more about the problem and how you could play a part in the solution, you felt that you weren't really included or communicated to in a way that made you be able to make decisions around that. Have you seen like outcomes from making a podcast like this in those kind of problems that you identified?
Yeah, it's started. And now there's other people who, if I'm wrong, they're also wrong, and they're smarter than me. So that's a comfort. Here we are. We started this one show in April 2018, and just this week, I mean, there's examples pretty much every week for the last few months, but this week is in particular seems quite big, that we've had a few shows join our network. We've had a few new shows start on the podcast network, and I've been introduced to environmental groups and community groups who are now interested in starting a podcast, and they want advice and help. And I'm like, excellent. Here's all the mistakes I made. Please don't do them. Learn from my pain. And it's great. So yeah, there has been an impact. I know that it's the coolest actual feeling, I think. I said it recently, and my dad actually called me up on it. I was giving an interview, and I said, I think the fact I started a podcast and that inspired another group, these two Australian mums who started a show called Sustainable You, they heard Climactic and they started their show inspired by it. And I'm like, that's the coolest thing. My little hobby started someone else's, or like inspired them to do it. And I think until I have a kid, like I'll be most proud of that. I'm happy Climactic exists, but I'm happier that someone else took that thing and it inspired them to do their own, because I'd love seeing other people's passions in this space. So cool.
Yeah, and I think it's you're talking about this network. I suppose we should explain for those who don't know that there's Climactic, the podcast, and then there's Climactic Collective, the network. And just a note, Doug Parsons said, "What is a podcast?" Ken helpfully responded here and said, "Here you go, Doug, climactic.com.au or climactic.fm."
Yep.
Also, we're having some issues with the stream on Simpatico, but Facebook's working well. So you can go to Climactic or Lee Constable and you'll find it there. So to answer that question about Climactic, the podcast, and then what the network is, where would you start?
Yeah, well, okay. I would start with Doug Parsons, who inspired me to start my show, or like who's one of the early shows I found to like model Climactic off. Looking around for climate shows, especially in 2018, was difficult. It's still difficult today. There's the 10-ton gorilla in the room, Apple Podcasts. It's the podcast app that everyone with an iPhone already has installed, and it's like 60 to 70% of podcast listenership is done through Apple Podcasts. So you open this app, you think, okay, I want to find something to listen to. You open categories, and where do you think climate would fit in that? Because there's no climate category. There's no environment category. There is, where Climactic's landed is natural sciences, and we are not a science show, and we rarely speak to scientists.
Yeah.
So there's issues around this. So I luckily found America Adapts by Google. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll start an interview show, because that's kind of how you get started. You just have a chat like this, edit it a little bit after, and then there you go. You get a podcast. And that is bread and butter of the podcasting scene. It's long form chats, the kind of stuff people really like about radio in between songs. I hope that's the case, unless you're the kind of person that if there's a gap between songs, you change station, in which case Spotify. Excellent. Yeah. Just quickly on the topic of Doug. Doug asked before if I was going to be wearing my iconic yellow beanie, and yes, I am. This is the hat I got after starting Climactic, because I was working a day job, and I still am working a day job. Now my day job is in the podcast industry, but to be able to mentally switch sometimes, I literally like, okay, which hat am I wearing? And I literally change hats. It's very dumb, but I do it.
Well, I suppose if you're not changing like physical location, and I think everyone can relate to that a lot more in the pandemic, where it's like, well, the commute to work, and you just like walk a few meters to your desk and sit down. It's good to have that.
Yeah, mentally shift gears like that, absolutely. So I got this hat to help me do that, and it's now become synonymous with Mark as the Climactic guy. So here it is still. And yes, I went looking through about 10 stores in Melbourne. I took a day to go find a yellow beanie. It nearly took me a whole day. In the end, it was a North Face hoodie, but not sponsored by, not brought to you by. I'll get a Climactic patch and sew it over it instead.
What is it with Melbourne and North Face? Even the Victoria Premier, his weekend press conferences during the pandemic has been in his North Face jumper.
That's right. Suit for bad news, North Face jacket for good news. If you see the North Face jacket on a weekday, it's good news.
Nice. Yeah, that's true.
So I had a show, and the show wasn't just started by me. I had a co-host at the start and a co-founder who helped me get this whole thing going, because I wasn't going to be able to pull it all off by myself. I wasn't going to have the self-confidence to record an interview and just put it out in the world without someone else that I trusted to say if it's good or not. And luckily I found Rich Bowden, who is a permaculture-inspired freelance writer and podcaster based in Blaney, Central West New South Wales. I've only met the man in person once, but he became like a uncle, brother, father figure to me after meeting on a Facebook group for podcasters. We've done the show, like the show has been consistent every week since April 2018.
Wow.
But that's kind of that's what Climactic, the podcast, is. But then we've got this Climactic Collective Network. So at the start of this year, I joined a big podcast hosting company, a big enterprise host. They host CNN and they host all the big radio stations. And so all of a sudden I had access to the tools, like the grown-up proper toolkit. I was like, well, this is fun. Does anyone else want to start a show? And we started the Climactic Collective, and today we brought on the 24th show.
Wow, congratulations.
Kind of exciting.
So what is the actual benefit of a network of climate podcasts?
So as of today, the only benefit, the benefits people get are they get hosted for free. They get me helping them get started. They get climactic.com.au as one place you can go to find 24 shows, rather than, at the moment, the current dynamic is the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has many podcasts. None of them are specifically climate change focused. And every show will occasionally have a one-off special. This one's about climate, and the next one's about sea turtles, and the next one's about a sex scandal in Australian Parliament. And you can't actually get a stream of climate engaged stuff from not only the ABC, but from the big podcast networks like Gimlet, which was bought by Spotify. People might know Gimlet. People probably set, like, for better or worse, Joe Rogan. People know the name Joe Rogan is the world's most popular podcaster. Joe Rogan has done specials about climate, but Joe Rogan also had Alex Jones from InfoWars, a far-right serial provocateur troll, on 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And so Climactic is a network of shows that engage with climate all the time.
Yeah. And of course, you know, you need climate to be mentioned in these other shows because it's a cross-cutting issue, but you also need a space where people who want to delve deeper can be as well.
Yeah. And so the main reason that it exists is so person A who is just right for show A, like it's a show from a psychologist talking about climate grief and psychological, like psychology practice and regimes and climate. This show A is for person A who's also a psychologist, and it's perfect. Mm-hmm. But then by listening to show A, they'll also hear about these other shows. And they know that show B is just right for their friend Joe, who does beach cleanups. And you should listen to this show about beach cleanups and ocean science and its intersection with climate. Yeah. And so the main benefit of the network, and we're starting to do this more, is promo swaps, like appear on each other's shows. So the hosts as well have people they're working with and friends and community, because podcasting is can be like, this is the setup, right? Mm. And it can be a very isolating pursuit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you've hit the nail on the head as far as like cross promotion as well, because in every social media and online, you know, entertainment and education space, having things cross promoted, collaboration episodes, things like that is the only way people get ahead. Yep. Has this kind of mindset been, do you think, adopted enough in Australian media making, or do you think that there's still competition rather than collaboration?
Really, really, really good question. If I can find it down to the climate engaged space, because the broader media is competitive. The Australian, like right now in Australia, and granted we're speaking to a global audience, so maybe just a quick recap that just like yesterday in Australian Parliament, the largest ever, the petition with the most signatures ever in Australian history was tabled in Parliament, and that was a petition saying we don't have a competitive enough landscape within the Australian media market, and this is a complaint largely about Murdoch-owned media. Yeah. News Corp, for those of you who don't know, who owns Fox. So on the one hand, there isn't enough competition, but on the other, the competition that exists is very resistant to collaboration. That there is a sense that like it's a winner take all game, because that's what we've seen. Like News Corp kind of has won, they have taken it all, and we're paying the price now. Yeah. So if you come along with a collaborative mindset in commercial media, you better be publicly funded like the ABC and the SBS, in which case you're going to get whittled away at constantly by government changes and neoliberalism and all the rest, or you'd better come to win and play the game and be fierce. Yeah. I chose option C. I chose to not try to win, but I found an empty space, and I'm finding other people that want to also be in that space, and I win when they win. And at the end of the day, I'm super lucky in my role of like, I didn't want to be the podcaster. I didn't want to be the voice. I didn't want to be behind the mic. I wanted to hear this stuff. And that is like, to this day, like my happiest is when an episode comes out, no one's told me about it. It just shows up on my podcast feed, and I can listen to a show. It's on the Climactic network, but I had nothing else to do with it. All I did was make a stage. Someone else used it, and I can just be like, oh, yes, here's the show I wish I found 2 years ago.
That's great. And so for someone who has never made a podcast before, is that a space for them, or are they better off going and making a podcast before coming to you?
Both. They are like it's never been easier to make a podcast than right now. The tools are getting much, much better. I point them towards apps like Anchor and Sounder, and all you need is a smartphone, and in your smartphone is a very good microphone. And no, it's not your microphone's fault that your phone calls sound terrible. That's your phone network. Like microphones and smartphones now are good. You can easily, like, man on the street interviews 10 years ago, and that'd be normative, like, interviewing people on the street with a microphone. The microphones that were used for like Comedy Central's shows and stuff that did that, they sound worse than your smartphone. Now you can just flip it around, speak into it, and speak to your guest, and you've got a podcast.
Yeah.
Do that. experiment. If you want to do a show, have a play around. And then when you want to get feedback, when you want to improve, when you want to start doing this a bit more in public and actually get heard, come to us, or come to us straight away and we'll pair you up with a show and you can help out and get your feet under you. Either one is absolutely fine. What Climactic isn't here to be is any kind of like, well, we're here and when you're ready, you can come join us.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this is a ladder, there's a rung that extends all the way down to the bottom. You can start at the bottom with us. Come on in. But if you want to do your own thing first, all power to you, and you'll learn lessons that way.
Yeah, cool. I mean, that's really good to know, because starting out in this space in live streaming and Simpatico, like it's very much all about collaboration and collective impact. You know, we've been talking amongst ourselves and our teams about that whole thing, and creating content around what people are doing to help them better meet each other is a big part of what it seems we need to do for this critical decade. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess, because we're coming up to the end of the half hour, give you, I know it went by so quickly, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about, you know, what you're keen, whether it's as a listener or as a producer or presenter, like what are you keen to hear more about, say more about in the, you know, next 6 months?
In terms of content on Simpatico I'd love to watch or potentially be involved in making?
Let's do both.
All right. As a listener, like, everything that requires a degree. Like my degree was in business information systems. And it was literally, my job was to know a little bit about business and a little bit about IT and just be the translator. And so like I'm a serial dabbler and I'll learn a little bit about a lot, hopefully. So I love content that goes deep on things. I loved your chat with Ket and Joshi talking about renewable energy. And I love the grid, and I love the idea of breaking up the grid and it being many little grids. I just love the visualization of that. I love more content around how Australia can become, like by 2050, like a super refined way, of course, way more just and way more egalitarian, but like a so much better version of Australia in the 1950s that was a manufacturing hub. Like we were one of the only country, like the list of countries in the world that make cars, very small list, and we were one of them. And like Australia was an innovator, and Australia,
and now we're not even on that list, are we?
Not even on the list. And we import the worst cars in the world because we take anything.
And I just saw South Australia tabling the idea of a tax on electric vehicles. They're like punishing people before even taking up the technology.
Yep. I read that this morning, made me upset. But also I'm like, you know what? If it takes them charging people for being on the road with an EV to then be willing to put in the infrastructure or normalize it, it's like,
that's true.
Look, whatever it's going to take to get the people on board we need to get on board with EV rollouts, like fine. Tax them. I think also bikes should have license plates, so there's like a sense of like responsibility and like you can report a bad cyclist. I'm crazy like that, so not all my ideas are good ones, but yeah.
Comment in the chat if you've got a problem with that idea.
Please do. I don't want to pay it as a cyclist, but I like the idea of like people on the road treating each other nicer, and I think license plates for cars are a good thing. I think they might be a good thing for bikes too, but that's just my pet theory. For me, I really want to talk to people in media. I really want to talk to people in media about how do you bring in more of the reality of climate change into the work you do? How does that change the work you do? And how does the existing media you're making, what are the bits that we are already coming up in media that we ignore or pass over because it brushes up against climate and like the level of erasure and ignoring the issue? It's like, I love it how Grand Designs, like shows like that, or like shows like cooking shows and chefing shows, it's not that they're not going out of their way to talk about climate, it's that they're going out of their way to ignore it at this stage, and it frustrates me. So I want to explore that.
I would love to join you in that, either listening or chatting. We will be seeing more of Mark on Climate Australia and on Simpatico as a whole. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can check out climactic.com.au, and you can check out not only Climactic podcast itself, but all the other podcasts, including 2 new ones that have joined the network today.
That's right.
And also, if you happen to be watching on Facebook, you can join us in CimpaticoTV. I was reading out some of the comments as we went, and we always welcome live audience questions. It's a great way for you to get connected to the guests that are on, so that, you know, after you see this, you actually have a way to reach out to Mark and chat to him. So please join us. It's free to join up. We don't sell your data. You'd be really supporting me and making more climate media in this landscape. So yeah, simpatico.tv is where we can actually watch stuff live and be a part of these audiences, not just for my channel, but Doug Parsons, give him a shout out. He's watching as well. Do you want to give Doug a shout out? You're one of your inspirations.
I sure do. Thanks for watching, Doug. I know it's late there, and wow, it's just very bizarre. You're hearing me live when I've heard you canned, I've listened to you for dozens of hours, and now you're listening to me live. It's very, very weird and cool.
Here's
to more of that.
You can check out Doug's podcast and also the episodes of that podcast that he makes in Simpatico TV as well. He's got the America Adapts channel here, the climate adaptation channel, I should say, here in Simpatico TV. Awesome. Well, that's the end of our chat. We're about to go to some credits, but then we'll be back after just to chill around if anyone on the live stream wants to ask Mark any more questions before we log off. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lee. It was so much fun.
Cool. So we're still live streaming. I was
Awesome.
just wondering if anyone's got any questions out there, send them in. I have questions. I have many questions.
My answer is much shorter.
Well, you don't have to, because we're here to hear from you. So that's all good. I was just wondering, obviously live streaming and podcasting, they've had this kind of overlap in the Venn diagram that's gotten bigger this year. What have you been seeing happening in that space?
Yeah. I think this style of content, you're literally seeing how most chat podcasts get made, but most of that video element is left on the cutting room floor. I never used to see the benefit in watching what I can just, what am I getting out of watching 2 people talking, I used to think. But of course, I'd be catching the train. I didn't want to hold the phone in front of me and watch 2 people talking in little postage size, post stamp size videos on my phone. Didn't get the point of that. And then be walking to the office, and it's I just want to listen to stuff and be aware of what's around me and enjoy the world. But now I'm sitting at my computer all day. And I love that I can watch stuff like this. And in a lot of my favorite podcasts that are chatty like this, that do YouTube versions, I enjoy it. I find it really, really compelling. So it doesn't make sense to have video for a lot of narrative stuff unless we start seeing animated versions of those shows, or have accompanying visuals that make sense. It's a brave new world. And I think, honestly, because of a lot of my day job is working with broadcasters and traditional radio content, the audio, pure audio, was going to stay pure audio. But I think stuff like this, the line between audio and visual is starting to blur quite a bit. And I think it's really cool.
And you're right. If you're already using a visual platform to do the recording, and because it's kind of more like a radio studio where you've got your guests there and you can see them and interact with them, it's more natural. People, when they make these podcasts, generally, whether they're online or in person, they're looking the other person in the eye. And it leads to a more natural sounding podcast, even if you don't do that. So yeah, it makes sense that that would also have the same effect on the audience, that they feel more kind of connected to the podcasters. I know some of the podcasts that I've listened to, they get like fan mail-ins, which is more like even old school TV where you'd write a letter and stuff and they read them out, and that's really cool. But I think, yeah, I also grew up with talkback radio, and sometimes live streaming reminds me of that in this sense, because they're like, call in, and that sounds really old and daggy maybe, but it's actually really, or it's the way that social media works.
Yeah,
the
that's right.
Audience can give you instant and live feedback and questions and stuff.
So much of the time we want to do the new thing, and like we don't want to do the old thing simply because it's old, but we forget that like talkback radio and people calling in, they didn't just do it because, hey, the technology exists. We have a radio and we have a phone. Why we put it together? Like, it's been going for 60 years because people like doing it. And like for so long in podcasting, we lost that because we weren't live and everything was pre-recorded and it was dead. And it's a very intimate medium, but it's a very isolated medium. And I think this kind of stuff really brings it out again. And even if you're listening back later on demand, a lot of the dynamism is back in it, and it's great.
And it's interesting, even like YouTube, which has obviously been the main vlogging, you know, whether it's something that's more of like an unstructured chat or whether it's something more produced, it's always been pre-recorded, and regardless of the amount of editing needed, then put on there. And we see YouTube, even LinkedIn is doing live video now, you know, obviously Instagram TV, it seems like, and Facebook Live, it just seems like everyone's recognizing that, oh, like this has always been more of a social media style way of communicating, not just making content and then having people comment on it after you've made it, but while you're making it. Makes a lot of sense. And especially if we're going to be doing something really educational and where we're really invested in our audience being able to come with us and get information. One thing that struck me was I went from, you know, doing like community radio and making a podcast while I was doing my master's. And then, so I had a couple of years of that and working and podcasting and community radio on the side in Canberra. And then I went and I was doing live science shows that whole time to live audiences. And then I went into TV, and suddenly it was just like me talking to a camera in an empty studio where 3 people were there. And even if they thought I was being hilarious, which in my opinion, I probably, I don't know. There's no audience feedback though. Like they can't give you any verbal audience feedback. You can't look them in the eye because you're looking down the camera. And that's how you're looking your audience in the eye. And then the production process happens and then it goes to air. Yeah. And there's no instant feedback.
No. There's no
and
energy.
More and more in mainstream TV, there's no feedback because, you know, watching numbers are lower and lower than ever before.
Yeah.
But I found it really interesting, like feeding off a live audience as someone who was in like a theatre background and then like a live science show type background. It not only made sense for feeding my ego, which yes, it does, but it also makes sense in terms of, you know, when it came to science shows and that science content, I could always say, hey, who's heard of this? Does anyone know this? What do you think about that? And you kind of get engagement and you know where people's understandings are at, even if you can never know everyone individually, but you also kind of make them feel a part of it. And I like that as a person watching. Like I like my question being asked and I like feeling like I'm part of the show.
You feel seen, you feel a part of it. Like the best podcasters are the ones who can make you feel like you are there, even though it was pre-recorded and it might have been pre-recorded months ago. And that podcaster has no idea who you are. And if you walked up to them on the street, they'd be weirded out because they think that because it's just their voice, like, here's my voice, I'm speaking to you right in your ears if you're listening to this as a podcast. It's like, this is such an intimate thing. And yet you have no idea who I really am, just judging from my voice. It's always surprising to see podcasters' faces after hearing their voices for hours and hours.
I'm pretty sure you were meant to have brown hair and be like 1 foot shorter than you actually are, and like glasses, where are they? Like
exactly. I what you were saying about live TV, it's like you would have got hired for that job because they're like, okay, look how great she is doing this live science show in front of 20 kids. Okay, here's this 100% energy from Lee. Okay, we're going to take her out of doing it in front of 20 kids live. We're going to put her in an empty room. And Lee, that 100% energy you had before, we wanted 130%, but there's no one there.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's like the camera soaks up so much of your enthusiasm.
Yep.
And working in kids TV, actually, often like over the 4 years, like by the end, I was one of the more experienced ones. And then you see new people, and that's actually always something as a new person you have to get over, is like, this is normally a 10. You're telling me that's not a 10? And I guess it's different for adult TV as well, but like, especially if you're trying to engage like little kids, like that's why preschool presenters deserve more awards.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think this is a really good like example of why social media has taken off as a whole, even if it's just Twitter, where you feel like the person's more accessible. You can ask them questions, you can like banter with them, sometimes be like, oh my gosh, the famous person liked my tweet, or like replied with a smiley face, like how exciting. But yeah, it also has kind of a communications strategy behind it. It's, you know, it's why we know that people invest in terrible stuff online as well, because they can feel part of toxic environments too, and feel seen and heard by those environments. So if we're not in there in those spaces, whether it's live streaming or podcasting or whatever it is, then we don't give people an alternative, do we?
That's right. No, we don't. I think it's a weird thought just occurring to me, and I'm sure someone else smarter has, if it's a good idea, I'm sure someone else smarter has said it, and I might have read it somewhere, but like, it might seem counterintuitive, but I think podcasting as like a form is more like a book than anything else. It's something you do by yourself. It's something you do, like it's a solo activity. And it's also like, it's why we crave hearing our authors speak like on a panel or an interview, because you want to see what else is in there, in that mind, other than this distilled thing you got. And like a podcaster, if you know, a good podcaster is recording to an audience of no one. They're making you feel like you're in the room there with them and you're speaking directly to them, and they are alone in a shed speaking into a microphone. And it's a weird thing. And I love that this option allows that the combination of the best of both worlds. Like we've got to get you with a live studio audience of 20 kids though, Lee.
I've been there.
But they're at home, right? They can't run up to you afterwards and rub boogers on you.
I think like doing like online live things with kids has a few times this year has also been like a great reminder of how much we have to thank our teachers, not just for in-person teaching, but for like their live web teaching this year. Wow. Wow. So hard. But so if you are someone who's been listening on podcast, I encourage you to come and have a look. You can find it on the Climactic Facebook page, or you can sign up to CimpaticoTV and see what the visuals were, not just Mark himself, and look into his eyes and see if he's a trustworthy man. And then you can see, you know, the beautiful imagery and the lovely graphics here. And
how yellow is Mark's beanie? You want to know.
How yellow? You have to know.
Yeah.
And I note that you put that in there, obviously, knowing people are going to listen and be like, whoa,
I'm triggering
yellow
myself
beanie
as a listener.
I have to see. Well, we're going to let you go now about your day in the podcast world, wherever that may take you. And thank you so much for being on the show. And not goodbye, but see you next time you're on the show, because there will be another time and another time after that.
Can't wait to come back. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Leigh. I don't know where 45 minutes has gone. It's been lovely.
It's been awesome. Thanks so much, Mark. Catch you later.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Not sure if it's actually finished.
That's me every episode.
Yeah.
Are we out and am I on mute? Not sure, but I'm just going to dance.
That's right.
I think we are on mute.
That would be a great little end thing. It's like you mute the cameras and everyone just does funny things or like pretends to keep talking, like the end of the news.
Everyone goes about their really weird hobby, like someone just brings out something they're sculpting, and someone just brings out their like Bob Ross style painting. Hello. Oh, cool.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Maybe I should just record that as the outro song. Don't know if it's on the camera, but I'm gonna just do a dance.
Am I still streaming dance?
I don't, yeah, I know. It's me constantly, but sometimes it's fun. Oh, who's messaging me? Oh, Ken says we're not on mute. Thanks, Ken.
Also, Ken is a very, very handsome man.
Hi, Ken.
Hey, Ken. No questions, guys? I know dozens of things.
The question we got was from Doug asking, what is a podcast?
Douglas.
Douglas. I'll have to double check if there was anyone on. I'm going to go to the Climactic Facebook page and have a look at that. I better follow Climactic Facebook page with my Facebook page.
About to get someone to take over some social media stuff. Who knows what they're doing? I've been stumbling around on social media for 2 years now, and
it's so hard because it's always not a priority, but it always is.